apologise for my voice this morning, but I will do my best to keep going and not cough and splutter through today's meeting. First of all, do we have any apologies?
No, Convener, no apologies have been intimated.
Okay, thank you. Do we have declarations of interest? No, not at this time. That's absolutely fine. We move to the minute of the meeting held on the 8th of November. First of all, can we approve it as a true record? Are there any matters arising from that minute? Councillor Bundy.
Thank you, Convener. As elected members of this council and as members of this committee, we all expect to get accurate answers when we ask questions. And we ask questions because they're of interest to our constituents. And we are representing our constituents at council meetings. We seek answers for them, not just solely for our own interest. When answers are not accurate, it is an insult to our constituents. The least they deserve is correct information when we ask questions on their behalf. At the last meeting of the Education, Children and Young People Executive, it is my belief that an inaccurate answer was given. The welfare of teachers is vitally important to our children's education. If we are stressed or anxious, we cannot perform to the best of our ability. Teachers are no different. They must feel safe in the classroom. They must feel that they can do their job without fear of assault. If they do not feel this, their welfare suffers, the education of our children suffers. Too many teachers in Scotland are being attacked. Over 22,000 incidents were reported in the past year. Teachers in Aberdeen and Glasgow are currently taking strike action due to violence and intimidation. Worried about this national trend, I asked about violence against teachers in Falkirk's classroom in this committee's last meeting on the 8th of November. After I received a reply from Mr. Mackay, you, Convener, asked about the rate of violence against teachers in Falkirk's classrooms. In response to this question, Mr. Naylor replied, and I quote, "Since I have been in post, I am not aware of any significant increase in violence by pupils towards teachers in Falkirk at all. We get the odd incident, but we track it and we know if there is any change. For clarity, I believe Mr. Naylor has been in post since 2015. After the last executive meeting, I was handed a Freedom of Information request which appears to contradict the statement. Answered by Falkirk Council, it shows that between April 2017 and March 2018, there were 95 reported assaults on teachers and staff members. Between April 2021 and March 2022, however, there were 940 reported assaults. These figures show that between April 2017 and March 2018, there was an assault against teachers and staff members every second day in Falkirk's classrooms. To calculate this, I am working on the Scottish Government's definition that the school year covers at least 190 days. Between April 2021 and March 22, however, there were 4.95 assaults a day against teachers and staff members in Falkirk's classrooms. Convener,
Councillor Bundy, this is an opportunity to raise an issue, not a speech. So I'm happy. I'm going to stop you there. I'm going to ask the director to respond to that. But this is about the accuracy of the minute, and if there's any particular matters arising. But you're now in a political speech.
Can I ask the question?
Well, if you could ask the question very, very briefly.
So, can Mr. Naylor answer? Is a 989% increase in the rate of assault of teachers and staff members a quote significant increase? Does he believe that 4.95 assaults per day is again quote the odd incident? And the Freedom of Information request, which I have here, is dated the 28th of October, which is before the 8th of November. So that implies that this information was known within the department. So can I get clarity if a Freedom of Information request does give figures as shocking as these, is this information raised to the head of the department? Thank you.
Okay, can I just remind people that you're open to questions, not political speeches. Questions are absolutely fine. So for future note, can you please take that on board? But I'll ask Mr. Naylor to provide the explanation for that.
Point of information. I don't think that was a political speech. It was declaring.
It
Freedom
wasn't.
of
It wasn't a
Information
direct
Act.
question. Councillor Spears,
I don't
I've
think
gone to the Councillor Spears. I've gone to the director.
Thank you. Councillor, in the context of the question posed at the last meeting, my understanding of the question was in relation to what had been very recent media reports of incidents in both Glasgow and Aberdeen, which you referenced, which had referred to quite serious physical attacks on teachers. My answer therefore reflected that, to my knowledge, such incidents had not been reported to me in Falkirk schools. In terms of the FOI data and the data going back to 2017 and then later data, the council have introduced something called the SHE system, which now records any and all incidents that are reported as being assault, which includes verbal assault. So in order to give you a fuller answer, I think what we would need to do is go and look at that database and break that down in terms of the nature of those things that are being categorised as assault. To my knowledge, the most frequent incidences of physical assault take place in our additional support needs facilities, where not infrequently young children with severe and complex needs may bite, may hit, may scratch, may kick. But to my knowledge, such incidents are relatively rare in our mainstream schools, but I'm happy to go away and have a more detailed analysis of what it is you're asking about.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Nimmo, if it's on the same matter, then I'm not going to take any more questions in relation to that. If it's on a different matter in the minutes, that's fine.
Well, it's a question in relation to the minute.
If it's a question in relation to the minute, but if it's in the same matter, then I'm not going to take any more questions on it, because we're in danger of it turning into a debate.
Well, it's not a debate if I'm asking a question, convener.
But if it's on the same matter, you will have a response from the director.
Well, I haven't to my question.
To ask your question, but if it's on the same matter, then I may move on.
Well, it's related to the same matter. I'm just wondering, regarding the number of assaults on teachers, how many of them were reported to the police?
Have that information.
I don't have that information, Councillor.
Well, can we get it?
If it exists.
Okay, thanks, Robert.
Okay, are there any other questions in any other matter in the minute?
Yes.
If it's on the same matter, I will move on, Councillor Spears, because we're not in a debate.
I'll speak before you.
Could you answer your question?
You should really allow members of the committee to ask their questions before you try and close them down.
Well, this is only for the
Page
accurate.
6, consultation on proposed mothballing of Blackness Primary School. Now, we've already agreed, and it's coming back up before committee today, that some of the information we got on that day wasn't quite accurate. So this hasn't been registered in the minute, but will certainly be brought up later today.
That was not a question, Councillor Spears. Okay, moving on to the rolling action log, and I'll go to Mr. Moody.
Yes, thank you, Convener. And the rolling action log provides information for the benefit of the committee where reports are outstanding from previous decisions of the committee. The comments section provides information where that report is not available by the expected reporting date. Some of the reports which are anticipated back are on today's agenda. Otherwise, there are explanations provided, but the action log is available for members to ask questions.
Okay, thank you. Any particular questions on the action log? Councillor Nimmo?
Yeah, a question in relation to action log number 537, convener. I'm just wondering if there has been any school inspections yet, or if there's any planned for the future that we have dates for.
David?
Yep.
Thanks very much, Councillor. There have been some inspections. We have recently had the inspection of Grangemouth High School and we're awaiting the report for that. And as with any report, should the report have any categories that are less than good, then that would automatically go to scrutiny. However, the summary report will be coming to this executive in September.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, if there's no further questions in relation to the action log, item 5 is the Education, Children and Young People's Executive Membership. And Mr Moody again. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. This brief report asks the committee to appoint 3 members of the committee. The first 2 are our teacher representatives, John Chalmers and Fiona Craig, who have previously served as members of the committee, and the third member is Caitlin Mossman as the care experienced young person on the committee. So I merely ask the committee to appoint those 2 members in accordance with the recommendations and welcome our new members to the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr Moody. Councillor Murtagh.
Yep, very happy to move that and to welcome members to the committee. I'm sure you'll be a valuable asset to the team around the table. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Colley.
Just happy to second that and welcome the board onto the committee.
Okay, thank you for that. Are content to accept?
Yep, to accept and welcome.
Councillor McCare.
Quite happy to accept, but just a question regarding point 4. What are we doing to encourage parent representatives?
Thanks very much, Councillor. I have got a meeting with, I'm currently arranging a meeting with all of the Parent Council chairs for the next week or so, and it's my intention to raise that point again with them all present. Obviously, the communications to date have been very much through email communication with the central team, and we've been unfortunate to secure a representative. So I'm hopeful if we get them in a room together, we can have a conversation and hopefully identify a suitable number of reps to come onto the committee and hopefully resolve this position before the next committee.
Okay, thank you for that, David. Moving on to item 6, we have a request to receive a deputation on the consultation for the proposed mothballing of Blackness Primary School. Would the committee be content to hear that?
Agreed.
Okay, we will move to the representative. I think Jan Fairley is on the line. The deputation have 10 minutes to make their case, and then there'll be 10 minutes for questions from members. And can I please remind members it is questions only at that time. The debate will then take place thereafter. Therefore, I would caution about political statements, and I will stop people if they delve into a debate at that time. Okay, I think, Jan, you're with us. I think you're going to speak first.
Yep. Juliet's going to go first and I'll go.
Okay, Juliet.
Good morning. Certainly. Good morning. Thank you all very much for approving my deputation request, allowing me the opportunity to speak with you today in relation to the proposed mothballing of Blackness Primary School in August of this year. We are delighted that Falkirk Council have offered us a stay of execution as reported in the Falkirk Herald. Despite this, we felt it was still very important that we use this opportunity to speak to you all today. With inaccuracies in the initial report used to start the consultation process to mothball Blackness Primary School, we thought it important to correct the record. I speak today as a member of the Blackness Primary School Parent Council. Yes, it does exist. But I also speak to you as a medical doctor and a mother. My 6-year-old daughter Anna is neurodiverse. Her social, emotional and educational needs are best served within the smaller, nurturing environment of Blackness Primary School. The initial report in this report. Can I seek clarification from officers where the research presented to the Council came from? Smaller class sizes improves some children's social awareness and interaction, according to professional opinion. It allows for a more personalised, nurturing environment, which allows teachers to cater to individual needs. Why was none of this mentioned in the original report? Many activities such as football, drama and many other activities. The money the school provides to use this facility allows the community hall to support other community groups. Closure of the school, I believe, would quickly be followed by closure of the community hall. As well as ripping the school out the town, the decision to mothball Blackness Primary School could have ripped the heart out of the community. Where would we go to have town events such as Cayleys or other get-togethers? South Queensferry Pipe Band also practices at our community hall. The proposed mothballing, therefore, could have severed our links with other communities. The initial report failed to acknowledge this, or the financial support required to keep the community hall open. When an asset is being underused, it is easy to fall into the fallacy of thinking that we need to close it. Successful business people will tell you this is the wrong approach. The question we should be asking ourselves is, can we better utilise this asset for our aims? With Blackness being a tourist hotspot, couldn't the school grounds be used for parking? Alleviating the current congestion and allowing more tourists to visit would be a big boost to local people and local businesses. It would also support our tourism trade. Had the council ever taken this idea into consideration? So far, I have highlighted the lack of balance, the lack of scope, and the lack of ambition in the initial report. I now want to proceed to address the inaccuracies. We currently have 9 children attending Blackness Primary School, 1 having recently enrolled. We also have several preschool children in Blackness. In consideration of these preschool children, this means the school catchment role from August 2023 will potentially be 8 catchment and 5 non-catchment children, totalling 13 pupils. In August 2024, 12 catchment and 5 non-catchment, totalling 17 pupils. August 2025, 15 catchment and 4 non-catchment, totalling 19 pupils. And in August 2026, 18 catchment and 3 non-catchment, totalling 21 pupils. These numbers do not, of course, take into consideration the large number of family homes currently under construction on the east side of Bo'ness, which is, of course, that side closest to Blackness. With Grange Primary School currently looking like it will reach 117% capacity over the next 10 years, logic implies that some of the children who move to these new homes will attend Blackness Primary School. There is growing fear amongst members of the Parent Council and wider community that this mothballing is being considered to ease the Council's financial pressure, with a proposed saving of £175,000. Could officers give a breakdown of these savings? And most importantly, can they clarify that none of these savings would have come from redundancies? Scotland's educational strength over the years has derived from the belief that parents know what is best for their children. Striving for excellence, parents aim to put their children into an environment that suits their needs best. This parental choice, however, can only occur if there are different schools which offer different environments. I agree that many children benefit from a larger classroom size, but I also believe that many children benefit from smaller classroom sizes. As a parent and as a doctor, it's my belief that it should be parents determining this decision, not the council nor the government. With 81% of respondents against this initial proposal, I am pleased that the proposed mothballing has been postponed, but we do have concerns that it has only been postponed until next year. What reassurance can you provide us to the contrary? We also have many concerns about the initial report. Now, with the permission of the conveyor, I would be very happy to take any questions members may have.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jan. I'll now open up to the committee for questions, and if I can ask members can be brief in their questions and be succinct, enable everybody to ask the questions in the time that's allotted. Councillor Bundy.
Thank you very much for that excellent contribution. You stated that there's professional opinion that shows the benefits of smaller classroom sizes. Do you have any sources for that professional opinion?
I think much of that has come from the interaction with the teachers on the ground who are actually teaching our children. It came as no surprise to us that all of the teachers teaching on a daily basis in Blackness Primary School unanimously voted to keep the school open. In terms of formal research, there's a paucity of research out there that is evaluating the benefits of a smaller class, certainly below 50, but from parents and from the teachers on the ground, we know that it does.
Thank you. And just one follow-up question. You mentioned that your 6-year-old daughter is neurodiverse.
Yes.
Could you explain in your role as a mother and as a doctor how the mothballing process, if it were to go through, how that would impact your daughter's well-being and education?
My daughter Anna benefits so much from the expertise and the one-to-one that she has at Blackness Primary School. She simply, because of her ADHD, can't cope with a lot of noise and busyness around her. And with the input of with the expert input of all of the teachers there, she is able to achieve her potential within mainstream education. She's been very anxious about this. There's been sleepless nights, a lot of tears, and it has impacted on her behaviour, her ability to emotionally regulate. That's the impact it's had on her, as well as I'm sure, and I know having spoken to other parents, the impact has been similar on their children too.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but thank you for your answers and for your contribution.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Spears.
Thank you, convener, and thank you very much for your contribution to our committee today. It has been my pleasure in the past to meet you in Blackness itself, a truly wonderful part of our community, a wonderful part of our district. Can you tell me how this has affected the wider community? And I must congratulate everybody in that community for being one of the few parts of Scotland that has an increasing population, and I look forward to meeting you soon at one of your next meetings. But if you can explain to the committee how this has affected not just the children, but the whole community.
Yeah, so as the chairperson for the newly elected Blackness Community Council, it has been a big learning curve to understand that Blackness's rural settings and outlook and how we're made up has really had a significant impact to this, with a lot of the older generation in the village have went through the primary school, as have their children and now some of their children. The setup of Blackness is that we won't significantly have a massive housing development happening, and if a house does sell, they don't come up very often, but the ones that have been coming up have brought new families in, or new married couples that are now having children or had children and are now coming through the school. And the community hall, as Juliet has explained, is really the heartbeat of the community, and so much goes on in there, not just by the school. We have the Women's Rural go in, the pipe band, the Linlithgow marches come past, and it brings everybody together. And if the school was to close and afterwards the hall probably would go as well, it would split the community.
I'm so pleased to hear what an active community that you have, and it's one of the most beautiful parts of our district, and I would go as far as say the really only beach area we have on the Forth Estuary. I know under asset realisation there's
Councillor Spears, questions please.
For the future, but hopefully we'll look into that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks very much, convener, and thanks for a very informative presentation. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a question in relation to the figures you have for the projected classroom sizes? Where did you get this information from?
Actually, by putting our feet on the pavement and going around every house in the whole of Blackness and getting the numbers that way.
Okay, thanks very much. That answers the question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hannah.
Good morning, and thank you for your very full and very detailed presentation. I totally understand your concerns about the previous report, but what I would like to ask you for today is, have you and the Parent Council been entirely satisfied by the thorough way in which the consultation has been undertaken, or have you been satisfied that it has been thorough and that your voices have been properly heard?
So difficult. The initial report, absolutely not.
Absolutely, I understand.
Absolutely not. Would we be sitting here now if I hadn't have done the work that I've done? Probably not. And you probably wouldn't be aware of the children that are coming through the school, the community council being set up, and the amount of emails that I have sent out to MSPs and yourselves as councillors to advise of what has been done and the inaccuracy of the report that was presented back in November.
But I think if you could maybe just continue to answer what I was asking, are you comfortable that your voices now have been heard and properly represented in today's report?
In today's report,
yes.
And the opportunity to speak to you now, yes, we're very grateful for that.
Right, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Steinbank.
Thank you, convener, and again, thank you for your presentation today. My question is just, as parents, what is your understanding of what the maximum capacity of Blackness Primary School would be?
About 50, isn't it?
So I think the maximum capacity is sitting around 38 but we would need to obviously speak to the school and see how the two classrooms would fit, because they're split between P1 to 4 and then 5 and 6 and 7 in another classroom. So obviously with the ages going through the school, there could be an overlap between the two classrooms.
Thank you very much.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I will now move to the report and ask officers to present the report, and in doing so, perhaps questions that have been posed by the
Sorry, if I could just ask, I did right at the end of the report ask a very important question, which I don't believe has been answered yet.
That'll be answered from the officers when they do their presentation.
Right,
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so just go to the officers now and they will do their presentation. As I say, that they will answer some of the points that have been raised and the discussions so far. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Convener. And thanks for the very welcome input that was made by the Parent Council reps. The purpose of the report is set out in section 1. There's 3 recommendations before the executive today. Can I draw your attention to recommendation 212, which is the recommendation that we agree not to proceed with the proposal to mothball the school from August 23, based on the recommendations that are contained in section 5.10 of the report. Section 4 confirms some of the background to the report. It confirms the consultation period. In terms of the consultees, they are outlined in section 5.1 of the report. 5.2 has been alluded to earlier on. It summarises the consultation response. 73 respondents to the consultation and 91 responses were made. The main difference is some chose to send both a letter in and some also chose to send an email in. In terms of the responses, the table in section 5.2 details those respondents from the consultation groups that were agreed. In terms of the responses there, it was again correctly alluded to earlier on, of the 61 responses we got from the group, 18% were in favour, 77% were against, and 5% offered no opinion. When you looked at the total of respondents to the overall consultation, 73, 15% were for it, 81 were against, and 4% had no opinion. So alluded to earlier on, over 3/4 of those that responded to the consultation responded in a negative manner. For members' information, the 12 other responses to the consultation are outlined in section 5.3. Section 5.4 summarises some of the comments and opinions that were expressed during the period of the consultation. It shows some opinions and comments for those who were in favour of it, and the majority of the opinions and comments came from those that were against it. 2 comments in favour that were expressed, and with 17 comments that we felt relevant to bring to the executive this morning. In section 5.5, it confirms that in Children's Services we do take these comments seriously, and in Appendix 2 we tried to respond to the comments that we felt were appropriate that we could offer a response to. Those responses are set out in Appendix 2 to the report. In terms of the current school roll projection, what has happened is, again, the whole purpose of consultation is to take information that we get from those who respond, and we've done this. The response consultation has brought with it a fresh number of preschool aged children that currently are not known to us because they're not yet registered with Falkirk Council. So when we take that information from the consultees' responses, then we have obviously tried to readjust our projected roles going forward, which we've done. Albeit I would have to say, members, that the current role for August 23 is still projected in terms of catchment role to be 7. And I'd also just remind members that 7 is still below the mothballing criteria that was agreed by executive many years ago to be 10 or less. However, the overall projected role for the school in August of this year is 12. In terms of the catchment area demand, we're not party to obviously the footwork that the Parent Council alluded to, but in terms of our current projections, and this will change as parents register their children for education, either if it's in Grange or if it's indeed in the early years sector. So our projections certainly show from August 24 a rise of catchment demand above the 10 set for mothballing criteria assessment. And indeed, as we alluded to with the Parent Council statistics, our current information would indicate that that catchment role would increase from August 24 onwards. Section 5.8 confirms the position in terms of the upkeep of the school if members did decide to go ahead with the mothballing proposal, because members can make that decision if they want. The use of the community hall, I do take the point that was made by the Parent Council. For those that don't know, the community hall is adjacent to the school. It proves a vital part in the running of the school for the reasons that were outlined. In section 5.9, we've also confirmed that we do make an annual payment to the community hall committee for the use of that school hall, which is important in terms of the needs of the particular school. The recommendation alluded to earlier on is set out in section 5.10 from the director. I would like to draw your attention to the financial and resource implications set out in section 6.1. The question that Parent Council asked was detailed on the estimated savings. There's full details given in Appendix 3 of the report of where we expect the estimated savings could be made if a decision was made to mothball the school. The comment and question about any redundancy payments, then there would be no redundancy or any job losses from the mothballing if it was to go ahead today. Staff would be redeployed through the normal redeployment process that the council would adopt. However, it's worth pointing out that if the decision was taken to mothball today, a saving of £171,000 would accrue to the council. And given the significant financial challenge that the council faces of a £67 million budget gap, it's very important that we as officers look at that and highlight that to executive, given the challenges that the council face, the significant challenges. It's also worth pointing out in terms of the actual budgeted operating cost per pupil at Blackness Primary School just now, it's just over £31,000 per pupil. The reported average cost per pupil, and for Falkirk, the last reported one that we do in terms of the local government benchmarking framework, was £5,606 against a Scottish average of £5,916. So as officers, we're always quite alert to where there's potential savings could be made in line with the policy that we had for mothballing. Now, it's only right that we point out the significant cost per pupil to keep Blackness operational compared to both the Falkirk Council average and the national average. In terms of the rest of the report, the conclusions that I alluded to earlier on is that officers, based on the information that we've gleaned, and the whole point of consultation is to look at the information, which I think we've done very fairly and accurately, and we're suggesting and recommending that before exec today that we agree that the school is not mothballed from August 23. However, officers will also keep an eye on the situation in terms of the enrolments and the admissions that go on probably around March of next year to see if the expected demand that's been shown from the consultation responses comes to fruition next year for this session starting in August of 24. Happy to take any questions, Convener. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Greenhorn. I'll go to Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks to Gary for, excuse me, I think it's catching the throat thing, for outlining the report. I'd also like to thank the members of the Parent Council for coming along today and giving us their deputation, but also for getting in touch over the period since the report came out, and for giving the detail behind the statistics that you see in the report, which I found very useful. I think it's really important, and as Gary was outlining there in the report, the reason that we go to consultation and what we agreed back in November was that we would present, conduct a consultation on mothballing. And as I understand it, there's no statutory requirement to do a consultation on mothballing itself. But as a policy of this council, in order that we can get the best information, to get the best, to make the best decisions, that is what we do, and that's what's been undertaken. And it's been, I think, proven to be an extremely useful exercise, and that, as a policy, and we all remind ourselves that we have this policy as a council, that if the catchment roll falls under 10, then we do look at a mothballing process, not going straight to closure, but going to mothballing, consulting our communities. And there's many reasons for that, and Gary outlined some of those in the report, and it's right and proper that officers bring those situations to our attention, and they have done in the past. I was very pleased to see in the responses that came back, and I would thank officers for their endeavours in trying to conduct as wide a consultation as possible. I know I had representations from a number of the community, but also from local members, and Councillor Devine had come to me to try to ensure that we could widen out as far as possible, and that, I believe, has been done and taken on board, and that's, you see that the level of consultations before us today in the report to give us information. I will obviously be happy to move the recommendations as stated in the report, and I think it is a pragmatic view that the information that has come back, although next year will be, as stated, still under the catchment rule, that looking ahead, it is projected that it will increase and the catchment role will potentially go over that 10. Now, we can't be certain about that, and it's right that that's monitored, but I think that the suggestion and the recommendation of the report is prudent in order for us to make that decision today. And I think, what's come back very strongly is that the strength of having consultation and getting that information has enabled us. Had we moved in another way in contrary to policy, we wouldn't have that information before us just now. I do think that, and having been through this exercise before as a local member in my own ward, and Councillor Bowes was the same during our last term, the process of mothballing Bothkenner School, which in many of the parallels which you're drawing with the community hall, entirely sympathise with what you're saying about and what's been said about the beating heart of the community, or the function of a school as part of that community. Entirely understand that, but the process in terms of officers bringing forward proposals to us needs to be gone through in order that we can understand and assess from an educational point of view at this committee how we manage the school estate and manage the best facilities for our child's education. I don't want to enter into the debates around the merits in this paper, given the recommendation about the class sizes and the benefits of education per se. I think there's a variety of views out there. I think there's a variety of, when we're talking about smaller class sizes and smaller schools, about the differences between, for example, a small school. My own children went to a small village school of around 140 or 50, and what's 5 and 10. And I understand very much the passion, and we all have as parents to get it right for all of our children individually. But I think it's very important, obviously, that collectively as an authority and as committee, we assess the needs of all our children and make the best decisions given all the variety of all information. So I understand some of the points being made, but I think that the policy, as is stated, is correct, that we assess these matters and go into consultation and through that process. And I think that's been executed today. So I'm happy to move the recommendations in the report as have been put forward, and thank both the parents today, but also the wider community for their engagement, which has been very helpful, and the officers for the work that they've done also to bring it forward today.
Thank you, Councillor Murtagh. I'm happy to second the report, in that we always were going to have to tackle a difficult issue in bringing the report forward in the first place, and officers acted on the best information that they had available to them through the process that we have to go through at that time. And the mothballing, we always, and from our experience, knew that additional information would come forward, and that's where we are now. And I thank very much the engagement of the Parent Council and the community in doing that. And as Councillor Murtagh said, there are differing views around class sizes, and at some point small class sizes become too small to be give the best effect to the children, and giving that social interaction as well. And I appreciate that other people have different views on that, but again, we have to take the professional views that are given from the teaching profession that come through from our officers, and that was the recommendations that they've given to us. And have the whole aspect of mothballing, as Councillor Murtagh said, has proved to be very effective in the past, when we've done it in other schools, with a very positive experience for the children who have moved to a larger school, who are now thriving, and the parents are very, very happy with that particular move. We unfortunately can't be entirely divorced from the financial aspects of this and the savings that would come. And while we don't want to be putting one child against another, the disparity in the per pupil ratio in relation to the costs is quite significant. And we will also have to answer to others, parents who look at that and say, well, why my child not worth more than others? So that's something that we always have to be mindful of in doing this, particularly at a time when the council is so financially constrained going forward. And as part of getting it right for every child is making sure that every child has the same resources allocated to them, to be fair. But taking on board where we are with the mothballing and the information brought back, then it is right and proper that we do not proceed to mothballing, but it's also right and proper that we do need to monitor. And I sincerely hope that those that are within the catchment area, the numbers do increase, and therefore it makes the school sustainable going forward. And that would be my wish for the whole community of Blackness. But it will be important that we do continue to revisit that to ensure that we are getting best value for all our children across the council area. So as I say, I'm happy to second on that. I have a number of people waiting to come in. I'm going to go to Caitlin first, then Councillor Hannah, then Councillor Spears, and then Councillor Garner. Caitlin.
Thank you. Earlier was mentioned about the potential savings and how there was a gap in the budget that was quite large, and I was just wondering how large this budget gap actually was.
Okay, thank you. I'll see who, Gary, do you want to take that?
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the question, very relevant. The reported budget gap for the council just now is currently sitting at £67 million over 4 years.
With the biggest gap is actually this year. So it's quite significant at around 27 million for this year. Okay. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Convener. I clearly welcome that this report has come forward in a much more balanced and full report. I recognise that the Parent Council members may still be smarting a little about the previous report, but let's hope we can move forward now. Now that we have a much more detailed report taking account of the Parent Council and the information that has been done. I also welcome the work that the Parent Council has done, absolutely sterling work in finding the information, in consulting with the whole community, which has definitely to be a process to be recommended. The main question I have here, well, I have a number of questions and could be here all day, but thank you for the report. But I am a little concerned about Appendix 3, which you referred to, Gary, and when you referred, excuse me, it must be catchy. When you referred to it, you say that there will be no redundancies. However, in Appendix 3, you identify savings of employee costs of £175,000 in the event that there was a mothballing of the school. I'm a wee bit curious how, if there are no redundancies, does the council plan to save £175,000?
Okay, very relevant question, Councillor. Just to say that in terms of the way it works is that there are huge turnover of staff in schools every year as part of our workforce planning. Say, for example, a teacher wasn't required at Blackness, that teacher would be offered another job in another school from the start of the next term from the vacancies that we would have, and we do that for all works of staff. We include some of the catering staff, some of the cleaning staff, and some of the support staff that are vital that work in that school as well. They've moved around as natural turnover allows us to move those posts and to fill vacancies elsewhere in the system. So effectively, we've saved the budget that's allocated to, in this case, Blackness Primary School, but the staff will move into other budgeted vacant posts that would exist elsewhere in our establishments.
But there would be an overall reduction in the number of staff.
There would be an overall reduction in the number of staff, yes, that's absolutely correct.
Right, thank you very much for that. The other question I have is about the 12-month stay of action. I mean, given the information about the proposed, the likely future roles, I would have thought that it's more of an ongoing check on all the small schools, perhaps, and making an ongoing check on school roles as they go up and down. Because it does seem to me that just giving a stay of action for a year is leaving the sword of Damocles over the community in a way that's perhaps not ideal.
Okay, firstly, you're right, absolutely correct. We do constantly monitor school roles. However, the monitoring of school roles are done at certain key positions in the year in terms of the link to the admission policy, which tends to conclude around the end of February in every year. And it's only then, despite the information that's coming up from our intelligence, from the consultation responses we've got, it's only when those children actually come to fruition through registration for preschool and beyond that we can say with any surety and certainty, probably around March next year, assuming also that we adjust that for any placement request appeals that we may get, that we can say that the school roll in August 24 would be above the mothballing threshold of 10. So what we have done is identified that there is a risk to the council that could happen, and that's why the recommendation has been put forward today. Again, we will keep a close eye on it, because at the current moment in time, the school roll in terms of catchment children has been under the 10 or less requirement for mothballing for quite some time, notwithstanding we do appreciate that the COVID 2 years that we had then was a challenge for us, but certainly for the last 4 or 5 years, the catchment roll at Blackness has been under our agreed mothballing threshold, and that's important. As officers, we've got to make sure we adhere to the decision the previous executive made, and we would consider things on that basis. So the key here is we'll look at registration through the mission process from November through to February next year.
Thank you.
Gary, on the back of that, can I just ask that, is my assumption correct that you would also take into account the future projections as well, so that we're not just taking it as a snapshot of that, but the future years would also be taken into account?
Absolutely. The school itself hasn't a nursery class, so obviously if there are any preschool children that register to go into any other establishments in Falkirk area, we would pick it up, and that would be included in our roll projections going forward. So that's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Spears.
Thank you, convener. Hopefully everybody will vote for this suggestion. It makes sense, but the sword of Damocles, as you say, hangs over and will hang over in years to come because of an executive decision taken some years ago. I think it's maybe time for our rural areas we examined that decision that was taken some years ago. We, as elected members for Falkirk, are elected for the whole district, and we need to recognise very clearly that the district differs in many areas. So what fits in one place does not fit somewhere else. So we need to maybe revisit this, because if we want to maintain our rural communities, and remember, kids are educated to be part of a community, and if you just take away the school, you don't have a community. So it's the whole purpose of what we're trying to do and educate kids and bring them in a place where they want to live and be brought up and stay and develop as part of our district, and that's why we're here. So we really need to revisit this. But every success to Blackness Primary School, and I send my regards for Councillor Anne Ritchie, who I know has been greatly involved, and she wants to recognise that the Parent Council have really worked hard here to save their school, and sends every congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spears. And Councillor Garner.
Thank you, Convener. And I agree with what you were saying earlier when you were speaking to the report. And during conversations at my son's school, which is one of their schools in the area, which is 250 or something pupils are it, I've been speaking to parents, and they have been reading about this in the press as well, and they do perceive a bit of inequality in relation to what their school has and what Blackness does. I'm reading in here that the annual cost per pupil at Blackness is £31,697. I'm sure I read it in our report, but I can't remember it. Could somebody, I've got another question back to this, clarify what the cost is per pupil at the other schools, the average sort of a cost. Also, I kind of note that, as was mentioned there, it's 5 catchment pupils going up to 7 catchment pupils. The other thing, just with my knowledge of Blackness and Bowness isn't as good as some of the people in here, obviously, because I'm out further west. But what is the actual distance from Blackness School to the nearest school in Bowness? I don't know the answer to that. If somebody could answer a couple of questions, please.
Okay, thank you. Gary?
Okay, thanks, Convener. In terms of as I said earlier on, Councillor Garner, the last reported average cost per primary school pupil for Falkirk was in 2021, because that's reported through the local government benchmarking framework, which is independently audited and figures provided by Finance. The average cost per pupil was £5,606 against a Scotland average of £5,916. The figures for 21-22 have not as yet been published. The figures that we quoted were simply in relation to the budgeted operating cost of Blackness, to give members a true sense of the additional cost that's invested in Blackness, and given the size of the investment relative to the actual role of the school, which was just over 31 or just under £32,000 per pupil at 21-23 budgeted records. Thanks. So you said about the distance?
The distance, yeah, just for my own curiosity.
The distance is just over 3 miles from memory.
Okay, right, okay, thanks. And just I'd like to thank Juliet and Fran for the Jan, sorry, for their presentation, or deputation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. And Councillor Bundy.
Thank you, Convener. In Dr. Graham's deputation, she did question the research and the source of that research. I was just wondering if a source could be provided.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Councillor. At the previous committee in November, I made reference to the fact that I had been engaging with colleagues from Stirling University and Edinburgh University, and at that time what they were referring to was the research that exists in small schools, both for the UK and internationally, relates to schools of sizes of 50 to 100. When I posed the question about accessing research information for the situation at Blackness, unfortunately, neither university could provide me with relevant research information at that time. However, they were very keen to undertake that research if we could fund it, but I did point out the fact that we were in challenging times, and while that would be interesting, I could take them up on that offer at the time. So therefore, the information that's provided with the report is based on officer opinion in relation to the further diminution of the number of children in that and the perceived challenges that that would then have. But I think, as we've already heard this morning, there is obviously a clear difference in opinions between the parents of Blackness Primary School and the officers, which is absolutely understandable given the circumstances. And again, we sought to reflect that in the report today.
Thank you. Another thing that Dr. Graham mentioned in her deputation is the potential use of the playground for parking, particularly during the tourist season. Is that something that officers have explored or could explore?
In terms of the question of officers explored that, the answer is no. Has anyone asked us about it? No. What can it be done? Anything is possible. I'm just trying to work out the size of the playground in terms of the way that it's structured. Would it cause more risks allowing the parking there, access in terms of the gate being open? How would we get the gate open? Do we leave the gate open all the time? So these are things that we would consider offline with any request that was made. And I think actually this morning, I believe there was a request for access to Blackness. I've not looked at it in any detail, so I don't know what it is for, but we'll look at that later on. If it's around access to the playground, we'll try and accommodate it. Again, there may be a charge attached to it if there's any a sort of a resource required to open or close things, but again, we're open to offers, and if there is request, we take it forward under the letting policy that we've got.
Thank you. And one more quick question. Dr. Graham also mentioned that Grange Primary School is projected to reach 117% capacity over the next 10 years, and planning permission has been given for around 400 houses between Bowness and Blackness. With the figure being over 100%, would some of those pupils be going to Blackness Primary School?
Again, our colleagues in planning and other services areas within the council keep us up to date with the planning requirements of new houses, and they will be factored into any projections that we do. I don't have the figures in comparison to what was quoted this morning, but certainly what our projections saying, certainly for the next short term to medium term future, then the capacity of Grange Primary School, which is currently 284. The capacity, and I should have mentioned earlier on, the capacity of Blackness Primary School is 50 at this current moment in time, reflecting the number of classes that are in the school. But again, that would change when we get the updated information. We tend to update it every October or November every year in terms of our ongoing capacity projections. But given the points that we made today, then Mr. Teed's also on the call today, and we'll make sure that the team involved in that projections take on board the comments to see if in any way we can change the projections going forward.
Thank you. I think common sense implies that if one school is oversubscribed and one is under-subscribed by 40, and you're building 400 houses between them, it makes sense for the pupils there to go to the school that's empty.
Just to say that in that circumstance, we would probably do a catchment review of the other Bowness primary schools. So if Grange did not have the future capacity, we would probably be looking at rezoning part of the Grange catchment to another school in Grangemouth that perhaps wasn't as far away as 3 miles.
He did mean Bowness, but
Yeah, sorry.
My apologies.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Nimmo.
Okay, thanks, convener. Let's be honest, this whole situation beggars belief. How can we get this so wrong? There's something seriously wrong with the council's forward planning and the services forward planning if we're merely just relying on parents registering their kids for a particular school. Parents seem to be able to provide us with the figures for the next 4 or 5 years. Why can't the council? We need to change the way we deal with this in future. There's an issue as well with the current financial year, 2023. Gary stated that there's only 7 catchment kids enrolled, but the parent council have indicated that there's 9. I mean, we can't even get that right. There's something seriously wrong here and it needs to be addressed. Thanks, convener.
Okay, I'm surprised at your comments, Councillor Nimmo. Having been an ex-education portfolio holder, the formula's never really changed about how parents and the information the officers get from the service.
Well, convener, I'm sorry, but we've never come across this situation in the past. This is the first time that this has actually raised its ugly head.
Well, it's not the first time, I have to say, Councillor Nimmo, but it's what your question was around how the service got their information and the registration of potential pupils. That's not changed as far as I'm aware. So I think that your criticism is unwarranted there. But I'll ask Councillor Mr. Greenhorn to respond.
Thanks, Convener. As officers of the council, we present accurate information to the executive as far as we know it. The only way we can get accurate information if parents actually register their children, and the earlier they register the children, the earlier we're privy to that information. The information that's been provided to the previous executive and this executive is based on that information. That is fact, and this information was checked prior to the papers being printed. The reference to 9 catchment children, I think, was made by the Parent Council to say there's currently 9 in there, and that's actually in 5.6 of the report, which quite accurately says that when we previously reported to committee, the roll has actually increased by 1 since we previously reported. So again, we're reporting the facts to committee, so this Education Executive Committee can make the decision on the facts. The current projection of 7 for next year is a projection based on those pupils that are currently registered at the school, either as being encatchment pupils or non-catchment pupils. It also takes into account the placing requests that have been received. That number may increase because we've not yet finished the current enrolment period. It finishes at the end of this month. However, at the current time of writing, these figures were accurate. In terms of the overall assessment of the number of preschool pupils or pupils that reside in a catchment, as an education authority, we're only privy to the data that parents provide us through registration. We don't get data around individual catchment areas. We get assessments of births, but again, in rural areas, it becomes sometimes a postcode lottery, because sometimes a rural area can transcend a number of postcode areas, and it also can transcend a number of school catchment areas and indeed local authority areas. And that's some of the challenges we face in rural areas in particular. It's trying to accurately glean changes in houses, etc., looking at the population. But the key here is for any parent, I've always said it, that if you want your child to get on the system earlier on, register with your local authority. At that point in time, we can pick up and project early years planning, primary planning, and planning for secondary schools as well within all the catchment areas. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Gary. Reverend Rollo.
Thank you, Convener. I realise there are some very difficult issues here and very difficult factors, and they've all been highlighted already, so I don't want to multiply words. And I realise that the last report, it's been said, was based on the best information available. I remember reading that report. I've been in this committee for almost 20 years, and I remember reading that and thinking some of the arguments here are very, very weak, and I felt a bit uncomfortable with some of the stuff that was shared the last time, and I think now we've got a more balanced picture of what's going on, and I want to thank the representatives that have come along today and given us that, and also for what the consultation has thrown up. But I think we've got lessons to learn as well from the last report. I mean, I'm sorry that we caused so much heartache to the community with the report, and I'm sorry for the perceived inaccuracies in that report as well, and what I would perceive to be unbalanced nature of it. And I remember during the debate the last time that people like Councillor Spears made us aware of some of the things that were going on in the background that we weren't aware of. So my question would be that and observation would be that I would hope that we would learn lessons from this, and in our consultations in the future, maybe there's some things we can pick up and add to our already good portfolio of information available, and think, well, are there some things, are some of the local councillors, or some of the local issues, is there a parent council there, what kind of things? I don't know what was missed, but it seems as if something has been missed. In relation to the cost per pupil, we've already heard from the doctor that her own daughter got some special additional needs, and when it comes to the cost per pupil, which was highlighted a few moments ago, if children were put in places where they needed additional support, I wonder what the cost would be in a situation like that. So maybe there's some savings to be made by having rural schools which can support people with additional needs, which means that they don't have to go to other places where the cost per pupil could even be higher than the cost that's there. I don't know if the cost for how it balances out, what it looks like for pupils with additional support needs. So these would be my observations. I would be very thankful that wisdom has prevailed, and I would be very happy to support the recommendation. So thank you so much that the consultation has had such a successful outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Ewan, sorry, excuse me.
No worries, thank you, convener. I'd just like to echo the comments and thank Dr Graham and Ms Fairlife. Since the November meeting, I think your advocacy and your representations have been a credit to your community. I do have a few questions for officers, just sort of looking forward past this report. So within the consultation, there was a suggestion from a member of the Scottish Parliament that we could consider collaborative working with neighbouring authorities in order to better use the capacity we have on this part of our school estate. I've got a few questions on this. Is that something that demand has been assessed on yet? Has the conversation been had with the Parents' Council or any of the teachers in relation to that suggestion? And when would be the deadline for placing requests from children from West Lothian if they did want to exercise this option for the next academic year? Thank you.
Okay. It's a very interesting question. As a local authority, it's not usually local authorities' prerogative to go around and effectively encourage or poach children from other areas. That's why we have a placing request policy. So our placing request policy means that if there is children that stay either out with the catchment area or indeed out with the local authority area, they can apply to come to the school. Our placing request success rate is very high. In terms of Falkirk, we do take it seriously, and the vast majority of our placing requests that are made successfully permeate and be given accommodation or a place in those schools. We don't normally consult with parent councils or parents about how they themselves could perhaps attract a wider demand for a local school. However, I think the Parent Council have demonstrated today with their comments that they've done some intelligence work. They said on the footwork that were done to make sure they could extrapolate information that we as an education authority don't already have around potential and future registration or enrolments, which is good.
Thank you, Gary. And just on to my next question. We've heard a lot of ideas from the debate, from the representations made and from the council about the massive community utility this facility seems to have and the value of the space, especially to organisations, not just necessarily school kids. What other options, other than potentially the report initially brought forward in November, have been looked to mitigate the operating costs of the school, perhaps in the context, obviously, that's been mentioned of SPR, which isn't relevant to this, but in the wider context is, how can we potentially maximise the use and value of the space?
Just for members of clarity, the community hall that's attached to the school is not council owned, it's privately owned. So our ability to raise any income from the community hall is zero because it's run privately by the community association, but I have to say it's run very well by that association. The request for lets in Blackness Primary School in terms of wider use, we've not refused any, but there's not been that many.
Thank you.
Okay, if everything is completed, I'll go to Councillor Murtagh to wind up.
Yeah, and I would I thank everybody for their contributions, and I think obviously that there's only one motion on the table, and we're all in agreement with that. I do just want to make a point about some of the comments, however, that have come forward, and I think what's really important is that, you know, officers of this council have brought forward in November a paper with the best information that was available to them at the time in good faith. And there has been a comment about the Parent Council not being recognised within that report, and I believe that there was already an apology issued for that at full council, and you know, I think as members we've accepted that, and that was acted on and given in good faith at the time, but was proved to be inaccurate, and apology given, and I'm grateful to officers for that clarity and that apology. However, officers brought forward the information in that report in recognition of a policy which we as members set, and many of us around the table set, and some of us criticising it set as part of that, you know, administration. And I think that, you know, the policy that we have is not that when the roll falls below the set level, which is 10, and that's what we agreed at that time. And that was when the debates were had about why we were setting it at that level. And policies can be revisited and looked at. But the officers of this council have acted on a policy which we have set as members and brought forward that information. And, you know, when we're saying things like, you know, how do we get things so dreadfully wrong, or how do we have to be mindful of that situation, and that the balance that was required in terms of the arguments about why we have that policy was during the debate about when we set it. And yes, there was additional information provided in the report so that we could set the context, but our policy is not we just go straight to mothballing, or we just go straight to consultation about closure. It comes before this committee exactly so that we can discuss the circumstances of these schools as the policy applies, and then we go to consultation, and then we bring that information back. And that's what's been demonstrated here today. So I just want to be clear that I feel slightly uncomfortable sometimes about some of the language and criticism in the way that it's being said, and that I think that we have to be careful in terms of how we, when we use things like getting dreadfully wrong or things not being balanced or inaccurate. Officers brought forward a report that adhered to the policy which we set as members, and that was what was before us. And I think we've come through that process and demonstrated why that process is important and why that was set, and that's why we've got the recommendations today. And I'm happy that we seem to be unanimously going forward with that.
Okay, are we happy to agree the recommendations? Okay, can I say thank you to Jan and Julia for coming along today and speaking to us. We will now take a 10-minute comfort break and we'll reconvene about just before past. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, if we can come back into session again. Okay, we move on now to item 7, which is a request to undertake a formal consultation on a proposal to change the distance criteria for home to school transport. And it is, the director's going to say a few words first. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. And as has already been mentioned today, the council faces an unprecedented budgetary challenge where we're seeking to find savings of £67 million over the course of the next 4 years. In the context of home to school transport, obviously, as with all other things in the world at the moment, prices are going up, both for contracts and in terms of fuel costs. In that context, therefore, we have had a look at our existing transport policy and recognised that the provision that we make at the moment is a provision that is beyond the statutory distance entitlement in the legal act. We are in the current year facing an overspend on our transport budget, and we are also mindful that the council is committed both to tackling climate change and to reducing emissions from Falkirk generated activity. We also know that all the advice that we have from health colleagues is that it is beneficial for people to be participating in active lifestyles, and therefore, should there be a scenario where more children are walking to school, then there will be overall long-term health benefits. So in the context of these various factors, we have had a look at our policy, and what we're seeking to do today is seek agreement that we go and consult with the wider public, in particular the parents and young people that currently travel to school on buses, seek their views and come back to a later executive with some recommendations about how we proceed. I'm going to pass over to Mr. Greenhorn to take you through the detail of the report. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Robert. The purpose of the report is outlined in section 1. If I could draw your attention, just as Robert said, in terms of 1.3, the challenge that we're facing is not just the £67 million budget gap, but at the current year, we're projecting a £750 million overspend in our school transport budget. That's mainly because of inflationary pressures that affected the recent re-tendering exercise that was carried out. So there is inherent increase in pressures, as the director alluded to in his statement. In terms of the paper itself, in section 3.1, it looks at the climate change implications, and whilst there's no doubt that any reduction in bus contracts, the number of buses that we need, would lead to a positive implication for climate change, it does, however, then present with a challenge to make sure that as an authority, as a council, as a society, we try to minimise the demand of parents taking children to school if it was successful. And that's why the active travel policy is really important, where we would try to encourage our young people to find another way to get to school safely, which could be walking, cycling or scooting, or indeed, if they have got the travel pass, it may be in some cases, in certain areas, they could use existing public transport. The background is laid out in section 4. The current policy is outlined in section 4.1. The current policy is probably 1 mile better than the national standard that is set. Section 4.2 confirms the decision made by the executive back in October last year that we bring forward this paper, indeed for consideration, to go ahead with the consultation exercise. So the executive debated it in terms of the zero-based budgeting report that was done last year, and that's one of the reasons why the paper's also been brought forward today. In section 4.4, it gives some useful comparator information. There's currently 24 local authorities that operate a higher distance entitlement than Falkirk does currently. The remaining 7 operate broadly similar or lower distance entitlement. It's useful to say that of the 24, 12 of them already have in place the policy that we are proposing to go to consult on today. The details of them are contained there. I would say that in terms of we know that the financial challenges that are facing Falkirk are no different from any other authority, and it's likely that other authorities are considering to change their current distance entitlement policy as well, given the challenges that they themselves would face. The proposed changes to the existing policy are outlined in section 5. The proposed change is that it would be primary school pupils who would live more than 2 miles from their school, and secondary pupils, the distance is proposed to be more than 3 miles for the school. It's noted that this proposal would still exceed the minimum entitlement prescribed in the national guidance. And the minimum entitlement says that where the child or the young person is over 8, it should be 3 miles. So effectively, that would apply roughly to the P4s and P7s. But the proposal we're putting forward is we align all the primary school pupils to a 2 mile provision. So again, that would be more generous than what is stated in the national one. The proposed date of change is August 23. 5.3 confirms that in terms of the existing ASN transport, our transport for children with additional support needs will not really change, because that transport is assessed on individual case-by-case basis to look at the needs of the individual child and the situation that they themselves are in. Section 6 looks at the current legislation insofar as it affects home to school transport provision. The Education Scotland Act 1980, as amended, places responsibility, this is an important point, places responsibility on parents for their own children's transport to school, where they fall out with the distance criteria. 6.2 confirms that Falkirk Council used discretionary powers under the Act to reduce the minimum statutory requirements by 1 mile to the current policy that we have. 6.3 confirms there is a statutory undertaking to this consultation, because the Scotland Act quite clearly says that where there's a discontinuation of provision of transport by an authority for pupils attending denominational schools, it becomes a statutory undertaking. We're not also in 6.3 that rather than they just do the consultation insofar as it affects denominational provision, we are proposing that we do it as wide as we possibly can to include all pupils in the consultation. Again, the duty are outlined in section 8. Safe walking routes are mentioned in 6.4. Safe walking routes have we recognise are contentious, and we also recognise that during the course of the consultation, some questions about safe walking routes may be raised. And the questionnaire that was circulated to all members ahead of it clearly has provision for anyone who's concerned about safe walking routes to make comment or reference to it in the questionnaire. Just for the absence of doubt, a safe walking route is determined by a route where a child can get safely to school when accompanied by an adult. And it goes back to the 1980 Act, which puts a clear provision on the responsibility of parents to get their children to school safely. And that's a very important proviso that's in the Act, and it's sometimes some things that people forget is contained, that it's an important part. 6.5, members may be aware that there's a review of school crossing patrols that has been undertaken at the current moment in time. What we need to do when we conclude the consultation that's agreed today, we need to make sure that the alignment of those two policies or the two reviews are done. What we wouldn't want to do is make a decision about school crossing patrols without looking at the impact it has potentially on maintaining safe walking routes for pupils in light of this consultation. So we would envisage that those two reviews would conclude, if it's agreed today, to make sure decisions are made and recommendations are brought forward that take cognizance of the feedback that those two reviews and this consultation was agreed would have. Section 6.6 is very important. We were trying to increase the number of pupils that walk, cycle or wheel, scoot, call it what you want, to school. It also articulates the benefits in terms of physical activity, behavioural and the benefits of mental health in section 6.6. Again, it impacts on climate targets in a positive way by encouraging children to do that. It reduces the demand for parents taking their children to school by their own cars. In terms of section 7, it looks at the estimate of the pupils that are affected. The table in section 7.1 outlines that. It confirms that at the current moment in time, we've got just under 3,000 pupils that currently are entitled to transport to school. And that's split between the primary and secondary sector. The number of pupils that would lose out are 1,174 or 40%. Full details of how it impacts on individual schools, impacts on assessment on locality, is contained in Appendix 1, which we hope would be helpful if it's approved to members to assess any challenges they've got or any queries they've got from the constituents. It's worth pointing out also that only 24 of our 48 primary schools are affected by this. 24, or half the primary schools, are not affected. And indeed, one secondary school within the Falkirk area isn't affected, which is Bowness Academy, and there's no impact on the relationship we've got with the catchment link to St Modens and Stirling either. School transport implications are looked at in section 7.2. It's recognised that any reorganisation of school transport would reduce overall capacity of buses. It would also have to take into account any impact on existing fare-paying services where they maybe require school children to have a season ticket or a pass for that bus, and the bus may operate on a subsidised manner because of it. So our colleagues in Transport Planning Unit, if the consultation proposal goes ahead, we need to take cognizance of that before any final committee paper come back to make recommendations before the executive. Taxi provision is estimated with little impact on taxi provision. The impact is mainly on the bus provision. It also makes the point that if the proposal was agreed, that some affected pupils, I'm saying some, not all of them, we appreciate there's challenges in some rural areas, however, some pupils may be able to access existing public bus services free of charge to get to school. Not them all, but some could do that from existing services using their national entitlement card, which is an entitlement card the government brought in for all under 22s. The statutory consultation process, insofar as the period that's suggested, is outlined in section 8. It also stipulates some education benefits, and it also recognises the financial benefit it would place on the financial position overall of the council, as the director alluded to earlier on. And basically, if the saving isn't achieved here, we would have to look elsewhere to see where we could achieve a saving. And the saving that's been, the proposal here, still brings Falkirk in a favourable position in terms of the national standard. It is less than the national standard. 8.4 and 8.5 confirm the publicity and the suggested public meetings that we would have face-to-face in our high schools to discuss this with those that may be affected. 8.6 outlines the statutory and other consultees who will be contacted separately if the proposal goes ahead today. The proposal document is outlined and attached as Appendix 2, and Section 8.8 confirms the involvement in Education Scotland insofar as they're required to do it where there is statutory consultation angle to it. Education Scotland will be invited to all the public meetings, they will attend them, and they will report back independently 3 weeks after the close of the consultation period, and details of their response will be appended and attached and commented on in any further paper that's brought back before the executive. The consultation report suggested it would summarise all the responses and the minutes of the public meetings outlined in 8.9. 8.10 confirms at the current moment in time the scheduled date, if it's approved today, to go ahead for consultation. The proposal will be brought back here on the 30th of May. Section 9 looks at the financial resources. Again, it confirms the current annual position. We're projecting an overspend of £750,000, which is a significant overspend, and the significant overspend really reflected the retendering of the bus contracts, and the retenders were obviously at that point impacted on the current inflationary pressures that's been felt nationally. The final savings associated with the proposal will only be known once we actually get all the conclusions to the consultation. Our colleagues at Transport Planning work with various sectors, including our own service, to determine what would be determined, but they've estimated in terms of the 23-24 position that a budget saving of £625,000 is achievable. That is a significant saving that would go a significant way to alleviate the council pressures that they are currently facing in terms of the £67 million budget gap. An EPIA will be completed once the full consultation exercise has been undertaken, and we can fully assess the impact that any changes to the current school transport or other bus operator provision will have when the final assessments are being considered. That being said, Convener, I'm happy to take any questions on the paper itself. And my colleague Richard Teed is standing by also to maybe come in and answer any questions as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr Greenhorn. I'll go to Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks again to Gary for outlining the report and the paper and the detail that he has. I think it's very helpful. I don't wish to repeat the remarks that I made at the end of the last paper, but I think it's worth drawing our attention to what the recommendations actually are here, and that you know, the proposal here is to go out to consultation in order that we can gather the information required, which will feed into further reports, and that's in Recreation 2.1.2. That is what we are requesting, that the consultation is conducted in order to bring back a report which would then lead to any appropriate recommendations. And I think that's important to sort of state from the outset. Obviously, as has been alluded to already in significant detail and is in the report, we have a significant budget gap and difficult financial situation, and in an ideal world, and this has obviously been the policy that has been in place for a long time in terms of the current businesses, in an ideal world then perhaps we wouldn't wish to look at that, but it's only prudent given that situation that officers bring forward these proposals in order for us to consult and look at that, and indeed, as was said by Gary, if it isn't that, then we will have to look at other options as well. So I think it's, you know, what's been asked of officers is to identify potential areas in which we can bring forward and look at, and this is one which provides a significant saving, and that's the context that it's before us today. There are no conclusions within that about the recommendation going forward. Having said that, I think it is important to note, as outlined in section 4, that what is proposed is not taking us to the statutory minimum or maximum, depending on which way you look at it, but is still more generous than what the legal requirements are, and is indeed in place in many councils across the country. And I would suspect also that even many of those are beginning to look at those options, given the significant financial situation which we all face. And I think that the additional context of the situation with bus operators gives you know, additional reason why you know, and the overspends that are outlined in the report gives significant reason why we're looking at this proposal in particular. As was mentioned by Gary in his outline there, I think the EPIA which will follow and the full EPIA will be very important, and there will obviously be evidence fed into that from the consultation also, because it will give us a better understanding about potential options going forward. So I welcome the mention of that in the report and the emphasis on that. And again, I think that some of the information which we'll be able to gather in terms of, when you mentioned safe walking routes, it does come up, and it's important to outline what the Act says in terms of the responsibility of parents to get their children to school. But I think it'll be very important to hear the variety of views expressed from our communities. And I welcome that we're also having public engagement events as well as not just the online consultation, in order that those views can be expressed and we can get those details school by school. So I think that given what's already been outlined and that we are looking to go to consultation, I don't have an awful lot more I want to say about the proposal, and I think that we should do the consultation, gather that information, and then be able to reflect and debate what comes back and what the recommendations will be following that, and that would be the appropriate time to do so. So I'm happy to move the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Murtagh. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Convener. I agree with what Councillor Murtagh has already said. I think there's a number of things which the officers picked up here, and I think particularly inflationary pressures I don't think are anything new to anybody around this table or on the screens. This is purely consultation, but I did notice that if this was to go ahead, as is discussed, we'll still be spending £125,000 more next year on buses than what we did this year. It gives you maybe some sort of an idea of the difficulty and the costs and the inflationary pressures that's obviously on that side of things. I'm happy that what is being proposed still exceeds the minimum level, and I would like to, obviously, they're touched on here in the National Entitlement Card. I think that could be an important part. I don't know if it's possible maybe to even have a look at what the bus, maybe even speak to the bus people as well as part of the information to come back. I, like Councillor Murtagh, believe that the EPIA is critical on this to see the effects that it's going to have people. And with that, I'm going to leave that and happily second Councillor Murtagh.
Thank you, Councillor Bowes. I'll go to Councillor Spears. I then have Councillor Bundy and Councillor Steenbank, Councillor Patterson and Councillor Hannah.
Thank you. This throws up more problems than it solves, I think. And well, I agree, as a child I walked to school back and forward and everything else, but there's different differentials we need to take into consideration: denominational, non-denominational schools, who's entitled, who's not. But the biggest thing for me that it throws up is the lack of safe routes to school. I know I've been campaigning to get double yellow lines for access and egress around about Zetland Park, which is on a safe route to school. Reinstatement of zebra crossings, children's patrol, lollipop people, I think, need to watch in this day and age to get the genders right. The cost, the money you'll save here, you will need to spend to make sure and convince people that safe routes to schools are visible and work, and in many cases are there. So to save how much, you're going to have to spend about 4 times as much as that to encourage people to walk to school. As I said, I used to walk to school, but I would like to think, well, I know there weren't as many cars on the road then, and it's very difficult now. And we have systematically cut school crossing patrols. I know in parts of Grangemouth, we've taken them away altogether. These will need to be reinstated. That will be at a cost. So to say you're doing this just to satisfy the cuts coming from Holyrood doesn't really wash with the public. It doesn't wash with the parents, and I don't think it should wash with the councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Spears and Councillor Bundy.
Thank you, Convener. I welcome that the report takes notice of the potential impacts on area-wide carbon emissions and mitigating that through active travel. But one of the key ways to promote active travel, as well as increasing facility, is courses to promote behavioural change. So I was just wondering if that could also be incorporated in the development of the consultation.
Happy to include that in terms of, we'll assess that if the proposal went ahead today. Yeah.
Thank you. Also, thank you for noting that consideration will be made for both denominational schools and non-denominational schools, because the Article 9 of the European Convention of Human Rights is freedom of religion or belief, and the consultation will reflect that. We do have an equalities impact assessment. Will freedom of religion or belief be one of those impact assessments that are measured?
I'll take a note of the comments you've made, Councillor, and we can pass it to the experts in terms of when they prepare the EPI coming forward. I'll take a note of your comments. Thank you for that.
Thank you. You also mentioned, Gary, about how in some scenarios a substitution could be the use of the under 22 bus pass. I was just wondering if you have a figure of the current uptake of that in Falkirk Council.
I don't, but I'm happy to try to get that from Transport Plan and circulate that to you out with the meeting.
Great, thank you. And just the final quick comment was, I'm glad to see that in the consultation that there'll be a specific question on safe walking routes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bundy. Councillor Steinberg.
Thank you, Convener. And as this is a consultation stage, I'll try and keep it to questions on the consultation. So I just note at 4.4, given the financial challenges that are facing all local authorities, it's likely that others will also be considering similar reductions. Do we know currently where that is happening or where conversations are happening across different local authorities? Thank you.
It's a good question, Councillor. Thank you. We're aware that it's happening in terms of Western Bartonshire Council. They're consulting on this at this moment in time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Just on to my next question is, obviously there is the section 30 of the 1980 Act duty on parents, but it's not necessarily how people within the current catchment areas will have been living their lives. So my question is just on how will we be giving individualised communication to both impacted parents and young people if this goes ahead after the May meeting, and also throughout the consultation process to minimise the impact, but also to potentially promote active travel through that process. Thank you.
Okay. Again, a very relevant question. What we've done is we've made sure that all the head teachers and all the schools are aware of this. So all the head teachers have got a copy of this document, and we said we'd go back to them once, or if the proposal gets agreed today, and we will share with them any outcomes that come back from the consultation to make sure that they develop any communication to parents to encourage the things that you've just outlined and articulated very well. So again, our message is we need to make sure that the head teachers, one, are aware of it, they're aware of the concerns that are raised, they're aware of any issues locally about safe walking routes, so they can gather that information and any mitigations that we can put forward against it. So we see that head teachers will play a key part, and indeed the communications that we put on behalf of the service itself to help address some of the comments you made.
There, I think that one's working. Obviously, an initial concern that's been raised by communities reading this report in the last week has been on volume of traffic in and around schools and the concerns that essentially that will expand. What conversations, I think this is building on a point that was made earlier, have been had or will be having had with McGill's or other private providers of public transport to show where there may be areas of increased demand and how they might be looking to recalibrate their services to meet that demand?
Okay, I'll answer that question probably two parts. One, there'll be nothing done formally because we can't formally progress it until the decision is taken today. However, we are aware of the concerns that have been raised, and I think that was why we tried to say in the paper that the review school crossing patrols, because if there's an increased volume of traffic that generates from this, then that review school crossing patrols has got to make sure it takes it into account so it doesn't report prematurely on a volume that is less than may be the impact of this going forward. But equally, we need to talk to all the providers about that, and again, our colleagues in Transport Plan, who are the experts, unfortunately it's not myself, would take that into account, and that would be brought forward in the fullness of time and in the next consultation feedback report.
Thank you. It's just a final question on this point. Obviously, this will be a consultation process if approved today by committee, but for a lot of the safety concerns, they won't have been coming out of absolutely nowhere. There'll be long-standing concerns, for example, in my ward on Windsor Road near Falkirk High School. I've already had communications from constituents. do we expect, and I think this is building off Councillor Spear's point, that we will have to recommend some road improvements in areas to deal with volume of traffic, and also concerns about current areas which will become walking routes for a far larger volume of children? Will we have to make improvements in those areas?
Again, what we've clearly outlined in the consultation questionnaire is if any concerns, if any got about safe walking routes, then detail it. Our roads colleagues in the roads department, their job is to probably look at that, to assess it, and to assess to see if those routes maybe need some remedial action. If you remember, a couple of years ago, we had similar concerns over Drove Lone, and that was overcome through a process of all, everyone working together to try to overcome it. What we say is the assessment has to be made on, is it safe where a child is going to school accompanied by an adult? That's the key here. However, what we will come back from the consultation is anything that anyone flags up in terms of an issue, our colleagues on roads will look at that, assess it, and if need be, they may get independent assessment of a walking route. But again, that's probably further down the line, but it's something that we're very conscious is likely to arise, and we're very conscious that we need to make sure we've got mitigations to address it for the points you raised.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Ewan. Councillor Patterson.
Hi, thank you, convener. Yeah, I'm sure we're all in agreement that we encourage healthy routes to school. I look forward, however, following the consultation coming back, that we get a solid equalities report detailing how this is likely to impact women disproportionately, given that women are predominantly responsible for the primary care needs within families. So I'd like that to be discussed. I'd also like to see a comprehensive environmental impact report highlighting how any decisions that we do take are likely to impact area-wide emissions on the whole, and not simply highlight the reduction in bus emissions. So it's just a couple of points of what I'd really be looking for and to enable councillors to make a decision next time round.
Again, two very useful points. Not being an expert in environmental impact assessments, all we'll do is we'll take on board the comments that you've made today to make sure that if they can be reflected and we've got the information to reflect it, then we would make reference to it in the follow-up report. So thank you for that.
Appreciate it, Gary.
Thank you. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, convener. Like others, I mean, this is a report about consultation rather than about the issue itself. So I would like to address that very closely. First of all, in terms of walking routes, the issue of walking routes is not just a simple one. It's about the nature of the terrain. It's about the nature of the Scottish weather. It's about a variety of things. I mean, I've had a number of emails from constituents who are concerned, for example, what are they going to do when you have two children, one at one school and another at another school? One parent cannot walk both at the same time to school, and that's a major problem. And your consultation which I have looked at, does not include how many children do you have, how many schools are you needing to take your children to, and how are you going to be able to achieve that? And I think that has to be included in the consultation. I have one email here where with one child going to the Graham High School, it's a 2.9 mile walk across the main street, across the Grand Sable Road, down Lorison, under an underpass, through a narrow path at the railway bridge and down towards Graham High School. An hour each way to take the high school child to school, not to mention the problem that the same parent will have taking the primary school child to St Margaret's. So I think your consultation has to address these issues. The third issue I think the consultation has to address is the equalities question. Your questions in the consultation form relate to the equalities issues affecting the parent, but not the equalities issues that may affect the child. Not every parent has a child who is the same ethnicity as the parent, nor a child who is of the same religion as the parent, or carer, sorry, it could be a carer who is not a parent. So there are equalities issues for the children as well as for the parent. Not every not every child with special needs goes to a special needs school. A number of them do go to mainstream schools, and you need to take into account any special needs that the children may have. There are a number of issues there, and add to that the fact that you may have children who are carers as well as being children and being at school, and that needs to be focused on within your equalities impact assessment. That said, I do welcome the consultation, and I think this is a serious attempt at an in-depth consultation. But I do think it's important that some of these issues are taken into account. Also, I think there is the issue that's not addressed, which in terms of the climate change, which is, I mean, how many parents are then going to have to take their child to school in a car? And that does have to, as Councillor Patterson was raising, that does have to be addressed. I can't see how anybody with two children at two different schools can see both to school other than by taking them in a car. I think that might be difficult, but it has to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. Gary, do you want to come back on any of that? Just a moment.
Just to say, I think the comments Councillor Hannah made are they're valid. The only point we would make is that the examples you gave, our current policy still has parents that are affected by that. Just now, all it will be is an expanded group. So in terms of the impact is there anyway, but the group that's affected may be expanded. To what extent, we don't know. The whole point of the consultation is, and we took advice on the EPIA that was set out. It wasn't just our service doing it. We took advice from corporate services on how we laid it out. We would expect, however, if anyone has got real concerns about it, as you rightly said, it's a consultation. Feed it back to us so we can note it, and then we can report back to members, because it's members that ultimately will make the decision here going forward. So thank you for the comments. They're valid.
Okay, thank you. Reverend Rollo.
Yeah, thank you, convener. I realise this is another very difficult conversation, and appreciate the difficulties and the rise in costs. I mean, it's a 17%, if I make it approximately, rise in the costs of transport. It would be interesting to know a breakdown of that transport. Is all transport to school under review, or what percentage of it are we looking at? I noticed that, and there are other transport costs, and I just wondered what percentage this was of the whole picture. As regards climate change, I think it will put more people on the road. They'll take their cars to drop off their kids, which is going to create the problems that's already been raised. And I think I don't know if any of you have travelled into Falkirk at rush hour in the last couple of weeks. It looks like we've got an epidemic of temporary traffic lights, which has got huge climate change, I'm sure, considerations as well. But that's another conversation. But I just wonder if there's a wider conversation here as well. The cost of public transport, and I realise that there are concessions for age groups. The cost of public transport and the frequency of public transport, I think, is a wider issue for us in our area and in Scotland as a whole. When you compare with some of the European countries, I was one of the pupils that had to walk to school when I was a kid. I was also bullied, which is another opportunity when you're getting transported to school. Sometimes there's less opportunity for that. So there's other things going on. I was listening to a futurist speaking recently, and basically said the good old days are behind us. So I realise that things have to change. obviously, another observation is it's going to disproportionately affect the denominational schools when I look at the tables that are here, and but I realise it's going out to consultation, so consultation is going to throw up these things. So just a few observations that I made there, that I think there's some wider issues as well, and thank you for taking that observation.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Maureen. You've been patiently waiting. You're still on mute, Maureen. No, you're still on mute.
I think I need to go to Specsavers.
That's you now.
Is that me now? Right, okay then. I have a question for Gary about the table on 7.1, and it's saying that 298 pupils are going to lose the entitlement to, I presume, free school transport, and I'm just wondering if they are entitled to travel on school buses radius thing of 2 miles. Where is that number coming from? Who are these children who are going to lose the entitlement, and what's going to happen to them?
Okay, through convener. Thanks, Bonnie, for the question. Just to confirm, the table of 7.1 says that we've got 2,928 pupils currently entitled to free transport. If we went ahead with the proposal after consultation, then it's estimated 1,174 would lose that entitlement, so they would have to make their own way to school via the safe walking routes, via accompanied by parents, etc., etc. What we are saying is that some of them, depending on where they stay and subject to the availability of local bus transport, may be able to use a national entitlement card to compensate for that journey in whole or in part. That's all we're saying in it. And the appendices show the breakdown of those numbers for every school. 24 out of the 48 primary schools are affected by it. 24 out of the 40 are not affected by it. The details are in the appendix, Maureen.
Right, okay then.
Just a quick information, do you mean that some people will pay on buses and some won't, but it'll be on the same school bus? Some may be able to use their entitlement card or pay, but it's the routes to school, you know. Having an entitlement card, but it doesn't go near the school, doesn't help. Do you mean that it's on the same bus?
Oh, but you weren't asking a question of officers. Yeah, we don't interrogate each other. But it's not appropriate for you to ask questions like that, Councillor Pearce.
Okay.
I never said that.
Okay, to continue. Yeah. As an ex-employee of a denominational school, one of the things we did at enrolment day was to check the baptismal certificate to make sure that the children who were given first priority were baptised Catholics. And I know within the catchment area it's huge, and I'm expecting that, you know, all our C pupils will be given a place in a denominational school. That's a big issue for me personally. And having looked at all the other things that I've been encouraged, and I agree wholeheartedly with a lot of them, but there's a huge amount of safety issues here. And I know one of my friends phoned up and asked about the radius for the walking distance to school, and she was told it was as the crow flies, and she said, my daughter's not a bird, you know. And I think because there are 2 older children who are now at high school and this wee one's in primary 3, but I think there's going to be a huge increase in parents who have children who can walk to school are actually going to be driving them to school, and the congestion outside school is a death trap. I mean, I used to work in St Andrews Primary School, and that's in a cul-de-sac, and you've got parents who park in the most ridiculous places, as long as their child is as near to the school as possible, you know. And I think the volume of traffic is going to increase. They also stand and have a chat with their neighbours and all that kind of thing. And I think perhaps the police are going to have to be involved quite early on to make sure that access and egress to the school at 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock or whenever is going to be monitored, because it's ridiculous the amount of cars that are all round St Andrews, even in the bus bays. And even there, you know, we make sure that children are on the buses safely. The staff all go out. They have a walkers line, and they're walked out. And then if there's nobody there to meet them, they know to come back into school. So I'm just a bit worried, you know, that, and I really hope that the people who decide on the safe routes, that they are safe, you know. I'm just a bit worried about the parental involvement in that aspect of health and safety. But that's how I feel at the moment. Okay, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Gary?
Thanks, Maureen. Maureen, a couple of just points there. Your reference to admissions to denominational schools, it doesn't apply. Everyone is treated fairly in this consultation. It applies to all pupils, and all pupils that are in a denominational school will be treated the same as those that are in other schools. The reference to baptism certificate would be a matter for our admissions policy, not the point of order or the question being raised here. The second point is very valid. We get this a lot, is the question of where as the crow flies. Just draw your attention to 6.4 of the report. It quite clearly states how you define a safe walking route. And the safe walking route is the shortest route along a road, footpath or right of way suitable for a child accompanied by an adult from their home gateway nearest to the school, which is the curtilage gate at their house, to the nearest designated school gate. So that is not as the crow flies. It's a measurement, that's a precise management done under that set standard. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Gary. I have John Cummings now, and then Councillor Kerr. John? Oh, sorry, John Chalmers, beg your pardon.
It's all right. I've been called a lot worse. Just wanted to just clarify a couple of things, and I think Gary had already mentioned it. It's fairly local to obviously the school where I am. It concerns more the sort of going to high school, and it's something that I travel on quite a lot of the way, is that the Drove Loan. Gary had already mentioned the Drove Loan, and it being suitable for the kids, or the volume of kids walking up there as a safe route going to Denny High School. It would be, obviously, there's a lot of the kids are bused at the moment going to Denny High School, but it's very, very difficult to see how that could be saved. The narrowness of the Drove Loan, which I'm assuming is the path that the kids would be encouraged to take. But I know Gary has already mentioned that is something that they're looking into for the safety of the secondary school kids going from Bronnybridge. The next part is Arlendale seems to have been forgotten altogether from Denny High School in the sort of the localities either unaffected or affected. And again, that brings me to the second point about Arlendale. It might be only a few kids going from Arlendale to Antonine or St Joseph's, but that road is extremely quick, and it's about the safe routes area and making sure that that's safe for the kids going into those schools as well. And just on the information that's done as well, I'm not just keeping to the Denny cluster, because I know I represent all the teachers and all the pupils as well. Looking at that as well, Base High School, I'm assuming that the Madison kids that have been affected with it, I'm assuming that there is already Madison kids which do not get free bus travel down to the Braes at present, and that's why they've been missed out altogether. Or is it that part of Madison is still going to be in there? I know it's quite a big community now, and just wondering with the numbers that are there and what's in there. So I don't know if you can answer the questions, but thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, John. I'm going to try my best to just take the points that you've taken. We couldn't hear you terribly well, but it was about the volume of children they would be walking to Denny, the safe route to Allendale, and the numbers of children that may already not have an entitlement in Madison anyway. Were these all the points? Right, okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. And I'm glad the convener clarified that. I was struggling at certain points myself. John, just to say that you're right, the list there isn't exhaustive. What we tried to do was we couldn't show every street in every town. We're trying to show community-based references where people could make a reasonable guess at who would be affected or not. So we're not professing to be exhaustive, but we felt it was a useful help in the consultation process. If there is, you mentioned the almost the width of excuse me, the pavements. Again, if there is any concerns about safe walking routes, particular areas with the pavements, that would hope would come out in the consultation, and the colleagues in our own roads department would assess it. What I would say is those pupils, I'm assuming they were not accompanied by an adult at the time they were observed, and the purpose of the legislation clearly says that the assessment of routes is when pupils are accompanied by an adult. I'm not trying to sound hard there, that's what the statutory underpinning is, and as officers we've got to make sure it's measured and assessed on that basis. Another point about Madison, I don't know, I will check it and get back to you, unless Richard Teed's on the call, unless my colleague Richard can offer any update on that one, but if he can't, we will get back to you.
Yeah, I can add to that, Gary. In terms of Madison, there is some capacity on the existing school buses for fare payers at the moment, but we haven't included those in the assessment of any of these numbers. All we've looked at are those that are affected by the proposals, so who would either lose their entitlement or retain their entitlement, as is currently the case. In terms of Allendale is along a country road with no step off, so it would be whether it was 2 miles or 3 miles or 1 mile, it would be assessed on a safety basis rather than a distance basis. So that perhaps explains why that hasn't been included.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you very much, convener. I've some questions for Gary or anybody else that wants to take the questions. Probably leading on for Councillor Bundy. How can we increase the take up of the under 22 pass scheme? It's a great scheme. Not everybody is on board with it yet, because the feedback I'm getting, some people find it quite difficult to get it. You've got to have a photograph ID. You've got to have your birth certificate, and a lot of people have seen it gets to the stage where they get so far on the website, and it takes too much, and they come out. So it would be handy if we could try and address some of that going forward, because that will help the pupils going forward if we can get the buses. Because I'm just thinking a scenario where we're bringing kids for Limerick, they're passing Binnahill station, and they're stopping for the kids there, even though they're taken out of the catchment area where they have to walk. But if the bus is passing and it's no full, why can't no stop if they can use their pass? Letham's the same. They'll be passing Letham, and the kids for Letham could potentially use their bus pass to get to Earth Primary School. With regards to, and it's been mentioned a few times in the papers regarding the legislation and guidance issued by the Scottish Government, And for example, the Scottish Government's guidance is to improve school transport safety. It was issued to councils stating that authorities must consider the safety of walking and cycle routes to school for pupils living within statutory walking distance from their designated school. If the routes could be considered unsafe, then transport should be provided. Even the distances fall short of eligibility criteria. Further, the same document states authorities are expected to review eligibility criteria and have flexible considered safety factors such as, well, you mentioned, volume of speed, availability, safe crossings, the sufficiency of pavements and footpaths, and a big thing, street lighting. Because when we get to the winter time, this could be a big hazard for some of the children walking to the schools. Also, authorities are also expected to consider medical conditions of pupils which may affect travel to school, and also medical conditions where they may be of the parents, where they may be expected to accommodate their children as part of the journey. Leading on, I didn't get the answer you gave Councillor Hannah when she explained if there's a one-parent family and they've got to take somebody to St Margaret's and somebody to Graham High, how does one parent do it with two of them? And we're saying it's a safe route by the parent. So how do we manage that?
I think that could be broken down into a couple of parts. I'll go to David for the first part, and I'll go to Richard Teed around the safe walking routes.
Thanks, Councillor Kerr. So in relation to the under 22 bus pass application process, all of my schools are available to assist that process where families are having particular difficulties with that, because we have been aware of a handful of individuals personally about that, and the schools have been able to then support the individuals or families to complete those applications. So there are supports available, Councillor, and we would just encourage anyone that is having some difficulty just to seek out some support from the school in particular.
Thank you, David.
Councillor Spears. Councillor Spears. You went asked a question. You went asked a question. Could you please stop interrupting? Councillor Spears, allow the officers to respond. If you're asked a question, you can respond. Okay, Mr. Teed, could you maybe talk through the safe walking routes and how they're assessed?
Yes, thanks, convener. Yeah, all of the factors that the councillor mentioned in terms of road safety and crossing points, road speed, separation of pedestrians from the road, width of pavement, quality of pavement, street lighting, etc. These are all within the Association of Road Officers guidance that's made available for the purpose of assessing safe routes to school, and this is what the road officers use when they carry out those assessments. So if there are any routes or segments of routes which are concerns are raised during the consultation, we do have colleagues in roads who are on hand to clarify safety and do route assessments where necessary. In terms of the medical issues that councillor mentioned in that particular document, that's already covered within our transport policy. So if there are particular medical conditions, either of the pupil or the parent, whether it's temporary or permanent, we have a policy to cover that and to provide assistance where necessary to ensure that children can get to school.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks.
I think there was a couple of other ones that weren't answered. One, could you maybe give a wee bit of explanation around the use of the bus pass on the contracted buses as opposed to the public service buses?
Yeah.
And there's also the issue about where parents of two children.
Okay, the parents of two children, without sounding hard here, the statutory underpinning is
Is
that parents have got to make that risk assessment themselves to get their children to school safely. However, what we will endeavour to do through this consultation, and we'll look to see if there are any mitigations that we as a service, we as a council could put in place. So the statutory underpinning is that the assessment of that is left to the parents, their responsibility. However, if there's mitigation, and there is some schools that used to do, albeit maybe in the fair weather, the walking buses, so things like that. So we'll look at that because it's been raised to see if there are any suggestions or mitigations that we could put forward against that. So I'm showing the formal part and the informal part that we need to try to help support and address any members' queries. The second part is a difficult one. It's allowing pupils to access a contracted bus that's going from points A, B, C to a particular school. The challenge we sometimes have is that if the bus is going along a route and there's 4 or 5 points and it's passing pupils before they get to the final point, and those pupils go on the bus to pay, sometimes that bus is full before it gets to the other point where there's distance of time. It depends on the routes involved, but there are challenges in capacity, and it also means that at what point, if the bus is stopping at a bus route, a bus stop, where there is some children that have got the eligibility card to get on free, how do bus drivers manage that situation in no time? However, as Richard said earlier on, we do allow some routes where there is, if we know there's capacity, then we do allow concession payments to be received on these buses. This is one of the areas that we expect I'll have to come out in a bit more detail in the consultation, because we do expect that if it goes forward, the capacity in buses generally will be reduced. So it's a very important point, and we need to make sure that our colleagues in transport planning and ourselves properly outline the challenges here in the next feedback report. So it's a very valid point.
Thanks, Gary. A couple more questions, convener. Can we get an EIPA on single parents?
The EPIA covers all the areas of protected characteristics, the groups that are protected there. So anything that we've got to do will be fed back through that EPIA, which covers a range of people who are in protected characteristic groups.
Thanks, Gary. On paragraph 9.7, it implies that no risk. Does that mean there's no risk to what we're agreeing now, or to what's going forward?
It certainly doesn't apply. There's no risk overall to the policy. The risk lies in the feedback and the consultation we do if it's agreed today. There's no risk in us agreeing to do it. We're just going out to do a consultation.
Okay.
And I'm using the word just in a very flippant manner. It's not just, it's a significant piece of work.
And by the way, I realise it's going to be a very in-depth and serious consultation, because when people have had something for so long and the possibility of taking away, it's a lot of opposition to it, and understand the financial aspects of where we are at the moment. So it's not going to be an easy thing. The last, with regards to if we're encouraging people to use cycles and use cycle routes, and it's a substantial amount of people. Have we got areas in the schools that would cope with the amount of cycles that we're going to, safe areas for the cycles?
There isn't. A lot of schools will have designated cycle areas. The question is that, again, we need to wait and see whether or not that area will meet the future demand. However, what we need to say is that if it's not going to meet demand, we need to be responsive to make sure we identify other areas that will cope with that. So at the current moment in time, we'll take a note to make reference to that in the follow-up report, if that's okay, Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, that's fine.
A valid point.
That's fine. Also, as mentioned at numerous meetings previously, not just this meeting, but other meetings about indirect discrimination. Can we make sure we cover that in any report? One more, Convener, one more. Looking at the tables, it's not a question. It's just it's a comment. And when you look at some of the areas where the eligibility will be taken away for these pupils, and I just think Lionthorn, one of them, having to walk to St Mungo's as a walk. And there are other areas where there's another one there for St Andrews. They're walking for Lionthorn, Redden and Westquarter. That's a walk for a young person. So it's not going to be easy for them. I was lucky I got the bus when I was wee. I was too far away to walk to school. But when if things go forward and this is agreed, it's going to be very difficult for some parents and some families. But thank you very much, Convener, and quite happy to support the going forward for consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. This is at the moment only going out to consultation. However, just to highlight that we tasked officers with budget management over the year to ensure that the budgets are kept within the relevant parameters. We are living in very fluid financial times, and there's been significant pressures out with our control on many of the services. Education services are our largest spending budget, and much of what we can take from that budget is limited because up to 70% of it is related to staff costs, and not being able to take savings from the education part of our budget is very difficult, as it will have an adverse impact on other parts of the council service. We've got to the point now that we can no longer afford services that go beyond the statutory provision, and that's why we're having to seriously look at things such as home to school transport. It's something that none of us really want to touch, but it's needs must in order to be able to have a balanced budget going forward. And as Councillor Murtagh indicated, if it's not this, then it's going to have to be something else, and that may be far greater an impact going forward. But if everybody's in agreement, we're moving forward to the consultation. We will get a report back. It'll come back at the end of May to members, and at that point we'll be able to take a better informed decision and going forward. Happy to agree? To agree. Move to the final item, which is asset surplus to operational requirement. And Gary?
Okay, thanks so much again, Convener. I'll be quick with this report, hopefully. The report seeks to agree that two of our current assets are deemed by the service to be surplus to operational requirements. The assets in question are the Denny Football Centre, Denny, and the former Heathwig Nursery School in Slamanan. The section 4 outlines the process. The process here is to remind members, and we are aware that in future this process may change. The process is that as Children's Services, we are deeming these properties to be surplus to operational requirements. If it's agreed, those properties pass over to the Council's asset management team, who will then consider the future use of those assets, and a further report would go to the Executive in terms of their own asset report to deem those assets to be disposed of or leased or whatever. So the recommendation that they would bring forward would conclude the process. This is the first part of the process. The reason why we're putting it forward today is outlined in section 5.1. Denny Football Centre has been closed for some time now. The building, it generally is in poor condition and would require investment before it would reopen. The groups that were using it have been relocated elsewhere, and there's no longer a need for the service to keep it in our asset portfolio. The site of the former Heathring Nursery School was used up into when we moved the current nursery school into Slamanan Primary School as part of the early years expansion programme, which was done successfully. Thereafter, for a short time, the building was used with improvement and wellbeing service. However, that service has now transitioned to a single campus service at Lauriston. Therefore, we simply no need these properties. So the request today is to agree that as a service, these two properties are deemed surplus to operational requirements. They would then pass over to the Council's asset management team to manage it thereafter. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Councillor Murtagh.
I'm very happy to also succinctly move the recommendations in the report and also live in hope that indeed we do manage to simplify this process, as it brings up more questions each time than it actually merits. But it was outlined very well that we're deeming these assets surplus to operational requirements, and then it would move on to the next stage. So it's well explained why that is the case from the report. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Murtagh. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, Gary covered it well there, and Laura mentioned it as well. I wouldn't say I was overly happy with this facility in my ward getting closed. Nobody's ever happy when any facility gets closed, but I do realise the position the building's in. I do realise that all the groups have moved on from there and have found other facilities, and I do realise the position, the financial position the council finds itself in. So yes, I do second the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Councillor Spears.
Obviously, I have no declaration of interest, not representing either of these wards, but the Denny Football Centre, I do have vivid recollections of the previous councillor, Johnny McNally, before he came an MP, was very keen that this should go ahead. I know that I think that it has moved to another centre, but there's great concerns with the residents in that centre about traffic, noise, and various other things. Now, it's not a very good map we've got, and I'm not personally familiar with the centre, but it seems to be in a more isolated area where it'll not cause neighbourhood concerns. Is this building at end of life? I mean, or would it be better there so neighbours in the other area don't have to put up with the concerns that I believe quite a number of them are having to put up with at the moment?
I'm going to go to Councillor Gardner because he has in-depth knowledge of the building and of the local facilities there.
Yeah, I do have in-depth knowledge of the building. This facility has been closed for over 2 years. In the previous years before that, the usage was dropping, and the users, some of whom I know very well, have moved to other locations and using different facilities. This facility, as I say, has been not underused. It's just not been used at all for the past, I'm reckoning 4 or 5 years. It's hardly been used, and the community has got on with it and used the facilities, which, in my opinion and other opinions, are far greater. In fact, the facility, one of the facilities that he's actually alluding to there has something like 1,000 users per week. And this is kids from as young as 3 years old up to my age who use it on a Thursday night. So yes, it's a brilliant community facility. And all the points that Councillor Spears is trying to make there have been addressed by officers time and time again in relation to noise. That football park has been there for longer than I can remember where it is now, and all it is, it's a different facility being used far more with the community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, thank you, Councillor Gardner. I'm going to go to Councillor Patterson.
Did I answer his question?
Councillor Patterson.
I think it will be revisited.
Thank you, Convener. Just a very brief point. Yeah, I would agree that Heathring Nursery is surplus to requirement, but just in timeline, I would like to see that the asset management team don't dispose of the property until we've come to the conclusion of the strategic property review, just to give communities more options, given that there's a lot on the chop up in Slamanan. it'd be nice to still have something on the table to offer to give a bit of flexibility. I wouldn't like to see it getting disposed of before it could possibly be put to good use.
I think that would be the intention, but I'll just confirm that, Mr Mackay.
Yep. Thanks very much, Councillor. Absolutely. So the process would be that the asset team would obviously look at it in terms of community asset transfer. I was part of the community consultation up at Slamanan Library a couple of weeks ago, where the community turned out, and there was a number of representations really interested in both the nursery and also the community education centre there. And I understand that the groups are currently going to be linking with officers to explore the possibilities to look at, to put proposals in terms of community asset transfer for either one or both of these buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, John Chalmers.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me this time. I'm not sure if you can hear me any better, but can I just clarify? I take it the Denny Football Centre we're talking about is the old high school building, and that it's in there. That's the one we're talking about. Sorry, just for clarification, I wasn't 100% sure. I thought it was, and that's a lot of desolate land that's round about that anyway. It's scrubland that's round about that, just to clarify that point, sorry.
That is correct, Mr Chalmers. That is it was the old Denny High School site that's been looked. Okay, if there are no other questions, are we happy to agree the report? Okay, thank you. That brings us to the end of today's Education, Children and Young People's Executive. While we've not had a huge agenda, there have been very, very detailed items on we've given time to. So I thank people for their attendance and their contributions today.